Shalom Aleichem. This segment is brought to you by Rabbi Yehuda Shane, Administrator of Kashrus Anytime, a division of the Kosher Consumers Union, a 501c3 organization. We'll try to address now chocolate and cocoa. On chocolate, there is a shaila between the poskim if the bracha is shahakal or the bracha is ha'etz. Rav Moshe tends to say that it's a shahakal. The other ones say that it's a eitz. Usually, usually a pear is a eitz when you're taking out the juice of it. Besides, by grapes, it changed the bracha to agofen, and by al yav shahakal, the same shaila you would have a shtickle would be by oranges. Like in Florida, 90% or more of the oranges are planted for juice. So that's why many people make on Florida orange juice, they make eitz. On the other hand, the California orange juice, they would make a shahakal, because most of the oranges are not planted for that. They'll take eating oranges and make juice out of it. Brazilian oranges, on the other hand, is 90%, 95% is for juice. They would also make basically eitz on that kind of thing. But there's a big machlokes haposkim, and each one should basically decide whatever his Rav guides him to do. That's what he should do. In order to make chocolate, you first start off with a cocoa bean. The cocoa bean is like a shell on the outside or a pod, and the inside is called meat. It's not meat that's fleshy, it's regular, it's called meat. What they first do after they take it off the trees and everything, they put it out in the field and they ferment it. And every few days they turn it. It's very hot in those areas. It only grows in the hot climates. And they turn it over with shovels, etc., for it to ferment on all sides. Once it's fully fermented, they'll put the beans in sacks. They send it off to a roasting plant, and they'll roast it. Each plant has his methods of roasting it, of how they want to roast it, what temperatures, how long they want to roast it, how dark they want to make it, etc. Then they take out the meat from the pods, basically, and it's broken into small pieces, which is called nibs. After it's roasted, they'll take those nibs and they put it into a hydraulic press, which presses it, and out comes chocolate liqueur or cocoa butter. That butter, called cocoa butter, is not a dairy butter. It's a completely powerful thing. After the thing has been pressed in the hydraulic press, it doesn't get out all of the oil, but it gets out the bulk of it. And they break apart those big blocks of chocolate, or really of cocoa. They break it apart and they grind it up into small cocoa powder, etc. In order to get out more of the liquid or cocoa butter out of the cocoa bean, they'll sometimes use a solvent extraction in order to draw out more of it, but most of the cocoa is not made that way. And Dutch cocoa, which is a very, very dark cocoa, that they'll use they have to alkalize it with such items as calcium carbonate, and sometimes the process used for making Dutch cocoa may have a chametz concern also, because sometimes they'll use some glucose in it for sugar, etc. It depends on each company, so you have to know basically by Dutch cocoa exactly what the process was, and if the one that gave the hashgacha in it understands what goes on and happens. And sometimes when they're making a Dutch cocoa, even for regular cocoa, they'll sometimes spray the beans with something which may be a shiloh of chametz as well. So cocoa powder basically is the powder, and higher quality powder will have in it some amounts of cocoa butter still left in it. When they squeeze out more of it, basically it's a little bit of a cheaper brand of cocoa powder. So a lot of cocoa powder companies, or at least some of them, like Hershey's cocoa powder, the regular plain cocoa powder. You can even use Pesach because there's absolutely nothing in there. They don't spray the beans beforehand or anything else like it. It's an OU company. According to the FDA, chocolate can only contain certain ingredients. It falls under the category which they have not for everything, but certain things they have. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration of the United States, has a thing called the Standard of Identity. And what they allow in chocolate is to have cocoa butter, sugar, lecithin, and vanillin, and nothing else unless it's going to be milk chocolate. Then they allow you to put in milk. Now, as is known, you don't want to ever introduce any water in a chocolate plant because basically the chocolate hardens like cement and there's nothing much you could do with it and it's a waste of time. So they really can't put in a milk. So how do they make dairy chocolate? Two ways. Either they use milk powder or they use what's called milk rum. They're made in different ways without getting into exactly how it's made, but that's what they put in to have that. The lecithin is put in basically to have the viscosity because usually with the even with the cocoa butter they don't want to use that much cocoa butter because cocoa butter is kind of expensive and in order to have the ratio for if you want to reach a certain viscosity you would have to have almost 50 times more cocoa butter than lecithin to be able to get that same viscosity. So they'd rather use lecithin for it. But Pesach, that turns into a problem because lecithin is made from soybeans, and soybeans is kitnius. So the Pesach ticker cocoa, the only way they could adjust the viscosity is by adding more cocoa butter. So of course it's going to be a more expensive product. There's other kind of fats they could put in what's called compound chocolate. A lot of chocolate chips aren't really real chocolate chips. They're really compound. They more melt and everything else. They don't have the same quality as that. And it's of course cheaper and depends on what the person is making. If he really needs a real chocolate chip, or he could work with a compound chocolate chip. In Europe, you have to be much more careful because in Europe, you don't have to have really the pure chocolate the way the FDA gives you the standard of chocolate. They could put in a lot of different kind of fat. They could put in other things in it, etc., etc. And in Europe, it's a bigger problem giving ashgacha in Europe than in the United States. In the United States, they've learned already that the reliable organizations will not give you ashgacha unless they have access to every part of the plant, every piece of equipment. They can analyze the mashgiach with the one setting it up to RC, etc., etc. They know what it is. In Europe, on the other hand, a lot of companies say, "Okay, Rabbi, you could go till here, you can't go further." We call that a mashgiach menachaloinos, meitis menacharakim. They don't let you go further. This is what it is. So it's pretty common over there. Thing which they should have a lot more things that should be so-called on the list. If it's on the list, people are using it not because they really know that everything is oiskalt, because they don't really have access to that to know if everything's oiskalt, but basically it's acceptable. So sometimes when they feel that they don't want to just write it's on the list, they want to say they're giving hashgacha, but they very often they don't have access to everything, and especially by chocolate, these things they could be putting in. Are they putting it in the ingredients? They're not putting it into the ingredients. Depends what percentage, and depends the reason they're putting it in. If it's a processing agent, they don't have to put it in, etc., etc. In compound chocolates, they can put in emulsifiers, basically, which are fat-based, and sometimes they can even put in butter oil, which is really made from butter. Sometimes it's not made from butter; it's made synthetically, etc., not natural butter. But you have to be careful with these type of things to make sure that it is under hashgacha, that the Rav Machsher and the Mashgiach he sends down really are familiar with the process very, very much. And the way it works is the first thing is once they have the, the cocoa powder, they'll mix that with the sugar, the vanillin, the etc., and the milk powder if they're using milk, and they put it through what's called a refiner. Refine is a set usually of 5 wheels, each one turning in the opposite direction and spaced very close one to another, one like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 of an inch apart. The wheels are made of aluminum with little teeth on it. And the closer it is, the finer the grind is going to be of the chocolate mix that you're going to get out of it, and it's a much better one. And because of the friction of those wheels rubbing on the chocolate ingredients, it builds up heat. I've clocked the heat on some of these refiners to be 100, 165 degrees, which basically is Yatzel according to everybody, and the only way of really kashering that will be with libum. Because, first of all, Hagolah you can't do in the chocolate company because they're not going to let you use water. And because it's absorbed dry, so you really have to have a libum. And you never be able to get it up that temperature because when you see it getting red, which is about by aluminum, which is about 1100 degrees, basically the aluminum is going to melt. And even at a less of a temperature of that, by 1700 degrees, the aluminum is going to be bent out of shape, and you're not going to be able to, you could might as well throw out the refiner wheels because it's not going to work properly anymore because the whole spacing of it is only 2-3 thousandths of an inch apart from the other wheel. Then in the inside of these wheels, they have water in there which cools it that the wheels shouldn't get too hot. So even if you try to heat it up with heaters or something like it, you'll never get it up to any sort of kashering temperature. Really, you should have dedicated ones, etc. Now, the OU does not allow you to kasher any of the equipment in a chocolate company with cocoa butter or chocolate because they feel, even though sometimes you could use shar mashkin, but they feel because cocoa butter and chocolate, or chocolate rather, is not liquid at room temperatures, they don't feel it to be considered a mashke at all. You can't kasher. So if you're buying a power of a chocolate, you should make sure that it does have an OU on there, so you know at least they didn't attempt, some other kosher certified didn't attempt to kasher from something that really shouldn't be kashered. So you're much safer with having when you have an OU on there. After it goes through the refiner and it comes off as a basically as a fine powder, then they mix it with your lecithin and they put it into a conch, which is a very big. The conch is a large tank with steel wheels in there that keep on revolving, and it keeps on kneading the chocolate mass that's mixed with the lecithin, your cocoa powder, your sugar, your vanillin, etc., etc. It keeps on mixing it and mixing it and mixing it. Usually they'll do it from a minimum of 24 hours to a maximum of 96. The longer it needs the chocolate, the finer the chocolate comes out. It's a much more premium chocolate with a better mouth melt, etc., etc. And that sits in the basically in the conch for hours upon hours. In the conch, the friction of the wheels turning will usually bring it up temperature. Sometimes they want to bring it up a little bit higher temperature. They may sometimes have heaters on the conches also to bring it up to the temperature. And basically, they will have it go basically over 150 degrees. So conches will also be a very big problem of kashering. But a conch, if there is a way of kashering it with water, it can hold the water, and it's not like the refiners that basically there's nothing that you could do with water. You can't do a gola, and it needs a lid on it. But conch is basically because there's always liquid in there. You can, but basically it's very unrealistic, and there has to be separate conches basically for milk and separate ones for that. There was a Rav Mach that claimed in Alpros chocolate that he saw the refiners. He kashed it with a libun, and he saw the refiners turn red hot. But basically, I question the reliability of his statement because you can't bring aluminum up to that type of temperature because it'll buckle and get out of shape before that, and it'll melt once you get it up to a living temperature. So basically, I don't really go along with that kind of thing. There's another company, chocolate company, kind of popular one in East Greenville, Pennsylvania, which is basically under the OK. So the manager over there is basically always plays game, doesn't let the mashgiach go in right away to see the thing, because basically what he's doing is he's using the same refiner for milchix and parav, and it can't be kasher, even though the OK told him he shouldn't use the same refiner, or at least not let it get above temperature of 115 degrees, which would be above that, or 120 would be Atziledes. So he always takes time from the mashgiach and doesn't let him go through. He wastes his time for half an hour. In the meantime, he had them close down the equipment so everything cooled down, so you don't know what it is. But it's really a milchik refiner, and it shouldn't be a part of a company. It should be basically designated as a dairy company. They've also was found that in the power of the designated tanks, this company was basically storing also dairy chocolate in there, and it was proven. You go through his records, you'll see that it was still in there. How he cashed it, it's beyond me how he cashed it. If he cashed it or whatever else he did, I don't know what he did with it. But basically, that company should be counted as a dairy chocolate company, and a lot of the other so-called smaller chocolate companies in New York are taking, or bigger ones even, are taking that chocolate from that company. So basically, a person should be wary, check out which company it is, and do your research and decide if you want to eat from those products. Then the last stage of chocolate before you make it into bars or into chocolate or whatever else it is, 50-pound bars, is they do tempering. Tempering does a tremendous amount for the chocolate. Every company has a secret how he does the tempering. They'll play around. They'll first heat it up to a temperature of like 95, 98 degrees. Then they lower the temperature for a certain period of time. They chill it and then they raise the temperature. It goes back and forth. It is kind of complicated, and it's basically companies keep that very secretive exactly how to do tempering. It prevents your white blooming on the chocolate, prevents a lot of other kind of things with the chocolate. So tempering, but that is your last part that they do with it. And then basically, if you have a cholesterol company, you really can't make any chocolate in a cholavakum company because basically there isn't really no way of kashering it, and you're not going to want to make the cholesterol on a parva line because of you'll never be able to capture it back. So if there's cholesterol made, it should really be done on a dedicated cholesterol line. Sometimes there's certain companies that will do chocolate chips. One line will be sometimes parva product, sometimes dairy. Others will not want to use that line because they sometimes use dairy on it, and they'll only use the strictly parva line. But what they have to be careful is when it comes back rework from any of the lines of the chocolate chips, the workers, it was observed already by me, the workers will take the rework from the parva that's really being done on the dairy line and dump it into the all parva exclusive line when they're doing the rework, and really that's a no-no. So basically, you got to be on top of it to make sure that thing doesn't happen. We've had a few years ago the famous episode with the shukra cocoa, with for Pesach, which they were repacking it over here in the metropolitan area, in metropolitan New York area, and it came from China with no hashgacha on it whatsoever. Not only you didn't have a Pesach hashgacha, no hashgacha, and China is known they adulterate many of their food items, including cocoa, is done adulterated also with flour, as very common item by them, plus a lot of other things which they do. It didn't have hashgacha, and they were repacking it over here without a mashgiach, repacking it in the things, and they even wrote on the package product of the USA. And it was publicized by us about a week before Pesach, and a lot of people started raising the roof that how do you notify them a week before Pesach when basically a lot of them have been turned over their house and they were cooking and baking already for Pesach 2 weeks before, which I think they have a problem with that anyways because it means there was no regular normal food given to the family to eat for 2 weeks before Pesach. So I guess they must have been on intravenous or something like it, or they have to go to pizza stores to eat, whatever else it is. They have to suffer because of the 1 week of Pesach, where then you serve them everything basically frozen food, etc., etc. So when the Rabban Machshirim, Rabbi Daniel Levy and Gruber had a meeting about this when it was discovered it was under the Ashgacha that this was being done. So they had a meeting, and what was the discussion at the meeting? Not how did this happen or what happened to the Mashgiach, etc. Just how in the world did Shay find out? Yeah, well, they're still working on that, trying to figure out how it is. Then the OK put out a letter that they sent to the laboratory, but they refused to give out the report of the laboratory. But very interesting, because the product from China had multiple lot numbers, so you would have to send a number of batches to the laboratory. They said they sent one of them to the laboratory, and we don't know what they sent to the laboratory. They could have taken OU cocoa that they had at home from Hershey's and sent that to the laboratory, and it came back clean. Okay, we'll continue this thing at another time. Thank you, and Kol Tov and be